Imagine betting your own life, and the lives of 2.3 million people, on a single, desperate gamble, hidden hundreds of feet below the surface of a dying lake. Las Vegas just did exactly that. They buried $1.4 billion beneath the shrinking waters of Lake Mead, drilling a massive 3-mile tunnel through solid, unforgiving rock. Their goal? To plunge a giant, high-tech straw into a deep, untouched reserve of water, a depth so profound that no drought, no matter how catastrophic, could ever reach it. This 7-year, mind-boggling engineering marvel was supposed to be the ultimate safety net. It was hailed as the definitive, ultimate solution to the worst megadrought the American West has seen in over 12 centuries. But there is a dark, terrifying secret that nobody in the tourism board wants to talk about. The lake is still dying. The water level is still plummeting at an alarming rate. And that billion-dollar, state-of-the-art tunnel? It has a strict, unchangeable depth limit dictated by gravity itself. The brutal reality is that Las Vegas did not actually solve its existential water crisis. Instead, they just spent an absolute fortune to drill the world's most expensive hole in the ground, trying to cheat a mathematical equation that simply has no permanent solution. They bought a temporary illusion of safety, but the clock is still ticking. To understand the sheer absurdity of this situation, you have to look at where we are. Las Vegas is a city that defies all natural logic. It is an empire of neon and luxury violently slammed down right in the middle of the unforgiving Mojave Desert. This is a brutal, alien landscape that routinely bakes under suffocating temperatures of 115 degrees Fahrenheit. The skies here offer no mercy, dropping a pathetic 4 inches of rain over the course of an entire year. There are no lush valleys here. There are no natural rivers flowing through the streets. There are absolutely no natural lakes to draw from. Yet, somehow, this completely desolate wasteland transformed. What began as a humble, dusty railroad stop with barely 8,000 residents exploded into a sprawling, insatiable super metropolis. Today, it is home to 2.3 million permanent residents, and it plays host to an astonishing 40 million tourists every single year. 40 million people who come to play, to indulge, to shower, and to flush toilets in the middle of one of the driest places on Earth. And every single drop of that water, every shimmering fountain and mega resort pool relies on a reservoir that is vanishing right before our eyes. The house always wins in Vegas, but against nature, their luck is finally running out. Let's put this impossible survival into perspective. Every single year, the sprawling metropolis of Las Vegas drinks an incomprehensible 98 billion gallons of water. To wrap your mind around a number that massive, imagine the entire island of Manhattan. Now, imagine dumping enough water over it to submerge every street, every avenue, and every single park under a solid 3 feet of water. That is what this city consumes annually, just to keep the lights on and the fountains dancing. And here is the terrifying vulnerability. Nearly 90% of this entire massive water supply comes from exactly one single, increasingly fragile source: Lake Mead. If that lake fails, the entire city simply ceases to exist. But how did we even get to the edge of this cliff? The fatal flaw driving this entire catastrophe was not actually climate change. The true villain is a piece of paper signed over a century ago. In 1922, representatives from 7 western states gathered to divide up the mighty Colorado River. They drafted the historic Colorado River Compact, legally allocating the water to states like Nevada, Arizona, and California. But they made a catastrophic, foundational mistake. They based their entire mathematical formula on a handful of the wettest, most abnormally rainy years in recorded history. They divided up phantom water, a completely fictional volume of water that the river simply could not sustain over the long term. Every single modern metropolis in the American Southwest, including the explosive growth of Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas, was built directly on top of this century-old mathematical lie. They constructed a massive empire of concrete and steel based on a bank account that was already overdrawn. And now, that historic debt has finally come due. For decades, the water level in Lake Mead has been in a horrifying freefall, and it introduced a new, terrifying phrase into the local vocabulary: dead pool. The dead pool is the absolute worst-case scenario. It sits precisely at the elevation mark of 895 feet above sea level. If the water drops below that line, it can no longer flow through the Hoover Dam. For Las Vegas, this is an apocalyptic threat. They historically relied on two massive intake pipes to suck water out of the lake. Straw number 1, built back in 1971, sits at an elevation of 1,050 feet. Straw number 2, constructed in 1993, reaches down to 1,000 feet. As the lake's surface relentlessly plummeted downward, inch by agonizing inch, these lifelines began to slowly suffocate. The city's engineers watched the water drop closer and closer to these massive pipes, realizing they could not just sit in their air-conditioned offices and wait for their city to die of thirst. They needed a desperate, unprecedented plan. The solution to this terrifying mathematical countdown was pure, unadulterated engineering madness. If the water was dropping too low for the existing pipes, Las Vegas decided they would simply go underneath the entire problem. Enter the master plan. The third straw. Instead of dropping a pipe down from the surface, engineers proposed a 3-mile tunnel drilled directly through the solid bedrock deep beneath the bottom of Lake Mead. They would punch up from the lake floor, creating an intake at the staggering elevation of 860 feet. That is 35 feet deeper than the apocalyptic Deadpool line. It was an incredibly audacious blueprint, designed to be the deepest underwater intake ever constructed in American history. But drawing it on paper was one thing. Actually building it was a suicide mission waiting to happen. In 2008, the underground war officially began. To pull off this impossible feat, they brought in a custom-built, 23-foot diameter tunnel boring machine nicknamed Sandy. But Sandy wasn't just digging through ordinary dirt. She had to violently chew her way through volcanic basalt, some of the absolute hardest, most unforgiving rock on the North American continent. The conditions for the human crew operating her were a claustrophobic nightmare. They were working in suffocating, brutal heat, buried hundreds of feet beneath the earth. And the most terrifying part? They were tunneling directly under a dying lake, meaning trillions of gallons of water were pressing down right above their heads with unimaginable hydrostatic pressure. This wasn't just a construction site. It was a pressurized tomb. One miscalculation, one microscopic fissure in the rock, and the tunnel would instantaneously flood, crushing everything and everyone inside. They fought a grueling, inch-by-inch battle in the dark, constantly battling water leaks, collapsing fault lines, and the overwhelming, crushing weight of gravity itself. After 7 agonizing years of battling the Earth, the tunnel finally broke through the bottom of the lake in 2015. The mission was accomplished, but the price of survival was absolutely staggering. The final bill for this desperate lifeline came out to a jaw-dropping $1.4 billion. And the city didn't just magically absorb that cost. It was immediately passed down to the residents through perpetually skyrocketing water bills. But the financial cost wasn't the only controversy. Environmentalists fiercely blasted the megaproject, calling it a dangerous mockery of nature. They argued that building a billion-dollar straw didn't actually create more water. It just enabled the city's reckless, unchecked expansion in a desert that was clearly running out of time. Las Vegas had successfully engineered its way out of immediate death, but they had merely bought themselves a violently expensive band-aid for a much deeper wound. But even with the billion-dollar third straw firmly in place, nature continued its relentless assault. By the sweltering summer of 2022, the terrifying reality of the drought became impossible to ignore. Lake Mead had crashed to an apocalyptic 26% of its total capacity. And as the waterline aggressively receded, it didn't just expose cracked mud and stranded marinas. It began to reveal the desert's long-forgotten ghosts. The rapidly vanishing waters peeled back the layers of time, exposing the perfectly preserved ruins of Street Thomas, a pioneer town, swallowed by the lake nearly a century ago. Sunken World War II landing craft miraculously saw the sun once again. But then, the discoveries turned genuinely macabre. Hikers and boaters began stumbling upon rusted steel barrels half buried in the mud, barrels containing the skeletal remains of mob victims, secretly dumped in the deep waters during the violent 1970s. The lake wasn't just dying. It was bleeding out its darkest, most heavily guarded secrets for the entire world to see. Right as the headlines screamed of a city on the brink of absolute collapse, the story takes a massive, unexpected turn. Because behind the neon lights and the endless flowing fountains, Las Vegas was executing a silent, miraculous masterclass in survival. Here is the ultimate plot twist that nobody expects. Las Vegas is actually the most brutally efficient water-conserving city on the entire planet. They realized early on that you cannot simply drill your way out of a drought. So, they engineered a closed-loop system of mind-bending efficiency. Every single time someone flushes a toilet, washes their hands, or takes a shower in a mega resort, that water goes down the drain, gets rigorously treated, and is pumped directly back into Lake Mead. They recycle an astonishing 99% of all water used indoors. 1 gallon is literally used twice. But they didn't stop there. The city unleashed water cops to ruthlessly patrol neighborhoods, and they outright banned useless ornamental grass, saving a staggering 6 billion gallons of water every single year. The final, jaw-dropping result? Even though the Las Vegas population has exploded by hundreds of thousands of new residents, the entire metropolitan area uses significantly less water today than it did 20 years ago. It is a spectacular triumph of urban conservation. And recently, it seemed like the heavens finally decided to reward their desperate efforts. The historic, record-breaking winter of 2022 to 2023 dumped a massive snowpack across the Rocky Mountains, sending a surge of fresh runoff straight down the Colorado River. Almost overnight, Lake Mead surged upward, reclaiming 20 feet of elevation. A wave of collective relief washed over the Southwest. But the world's leading hydrologists immediately issued a grim, sobering warning to quiet the premature celebrations. One miraculous year of heavy snow does not magically erase 2 solid decades of chronic, systemic abuse. The structural deficit remains. The fundamental math is still violently broken. Mother Nature merely hit the pause button on the apocalypse, because no matter how brilliant Las Vegas's water recycling program is, and no matter how incredibly deep that billion-dollar third straw reaches into the bedrock, there is a hard, physical, and terrifying limit to the entire system. It all comes back to that apocalyptic number, 895 feet, the dead pool. Even if Vegas can keep sucking water out from their 860-foot-deep tunnel, if the lake's surface drops below that 895-foot mark, the water physically stops flowing through the massive turbines of the Hoover Dam. Millions of people downstream in California and Arizona will be cut off from their primary power and water supply. The river dies, and what is left of Lake Mead will stagnate, devolving from a vital reservoir into a toxic, festering mud puddle, heavily concentrated with decades of accumulated sediment and dangerous heavy metals. This is the ultimate, undeniable truth of the Mojave Desert. The $1.4 billion that Las Vegas poured into the ground did not buy a single extra drop of water. It did not magically refill the lake or change the fundamentally broken mathematics of the Colorado River Compact. What that astronomical sum of money actually bought was the most valuable commodity on Earth: time. It bought a temporary stay of execution. It bought an extremely expensive, borrowed window of time for politicians, farmers, and urban planners across 7 desperate states to finally sit down at the table and face reality. In this very year, 2026, the century-old, fatally flawed river agreements are officially up for a brutal renegotiation. And this time, there is no more phantom water left to divide. The era of unchecked desert expansion is completely, undeniably over. Human engineering is genuinely spectacular. We can move mountains, we can punch massive tunnels through solid volcanic rock, and we can build shimmering, neon empires in the middle of a barren, scorching wasteland. But money and machines have a limit. They cannot make rainfall from a cloudless sky, and they cannot magically conjure rivers out of dry, cracking sand. Las Vegas proved that we can fight nature, and for a brief, fleeting moment, we can even win. But nature is infinitely patient, and it always holds the final card. The multi-billion-dollar tunnel has been drilled. The massive underground valves are open. The heavily recycled water is still flowing through the mega resorts today. But make no mistake, somewhere deep in the pitch-black darkness, buried hundreds of feet beneath the receding surface of Lake Mead, the countdown never actually stopped.